Albert trudged through the ashen wasteland, each labored step kicking up clouds of radioactive dust that swirled around his worn boots. The filter mask covering his face made every breath a conscious effort, the rhythmic hiss of air passing through the deteriorating mechanism a constant reminder of his dwindling time. 3 days, maybe 4 if he rationed his breathing. That's all the filter had left before it would fail completely. Above him, the sky hung like a bruised canopy, toxic clouds tinged with sickly purple and amber hues, blocking any hope of sunlight. All around stretched the graveyard of what was once a magnificent alien civilization. The crumbling spires of the Arvani, their fractured monuments telling silent stories of past glory. He paused beside the remains of a colossal statue, its face long eroded, its outstretched hand now just a stump pointing accusingly at the sky. The city had been beautiful once, Albert imagined, before whatever cataclysm had swept through it. Now skeletal buildings stood like picked clean carcasses, metal frames twisted and exposed, their surfaces coated with the omnipresent ash. Just one component, Albert muttered to himself, his voice muffled by his mask as he adjusted the heavy pack on his shoulders. One decent filter core or a power converter. That's all I need. His expedition vessel had crashed 3 months ago on the outskirts of this dead city. The rest of his crew, Harrison, Samantha, and Lynn, hadn't survived the impact. Albert had buried them beneath 3 mounds of scavenged debris and marked their graves with whatever personal items he could salvage. The guilt gnawed at him daily. He should have been able to save them. The weight of their deaths had become as much a part of him as the pack he carried, filled with scavenged food packets, purified water, and the few tools he'd managed to recover from the wreckage. Albert had spent weeks attempting to repair the ship's communication array, but without proper parts, it remained as lifeless as the city surrounding him. A sudden gust of wind sent a wave of ash cascading down from a nearby tower. Albert ducked instinctively, covering the intake valves of his mask. As the dust settled, a new sound reached his ears, faint but unmistakable against the eerie silence of the dead city. A whimper, or perhaps a strangled breath. Albert froze, his hand dropping to the makeshift blade fastened at his hip. He'd encountered scavengers before, desperate creatures, more animal than sentient, picking through the ruins. But this sound was different, pained, almost human. Carefully, he tracked the noise to a collapsed structure that might once have been a temple or government building. Massive stone columns lay shattered across what had been a grand entrance, creating a labyrinth of crawl spaces and precarious passages. The sound came again, a soft, pained gasp. "Hello," Albert called out, his voice barely above a whisper. No response came, but the debris shifted slightly. Calculating the risk, Albert squeezed through a narrow gap between 2 fallen beams. The space opened into what had once been a grand hall, now with its ceiling partially collapsed. Filtered light streamed through the gaps, illuminating dancing particles of dust. And there, half buried beneath a fallen panel, lay a figure. Albert approached cautiously, then stopped short in disbelief. It wasn't human. The being's skin had a pale blue tint with intricate bioluminescent patterns that pulsed weakly along exposed arms. Long, dark hair matted with dust framed a face that was eerily similar to human features, yet unmistakably alien. Eyes larger, cheekbones more pronounced, the curve of the jaw more delicate. Around the being's neck hung a pendant of unfamiliar metal, pulsing faintly with inner light. An Arvani, one of the planet's native inhabitants, somehow alive in this graveyard world. The alien's eyes fluttered open, startlingly deep violet against the blue-tinted skin, and locked onto Albert. Fear flashed across those alien features, followed by a desperate resignation as the being tried to move away from him, only to fail. The lower half of the alien's body remained motionless beneath the debris. Albert slowly raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, unsure if the being could understand. The Arvani's gaze darted around frantically before settling back on Albert. With obvious effort, for Albert sensed this being was female, spoke in a language that sounded like crystalline shards colliding, interspersed with what might have been trade language words. "Help!" she finally managed in the interstellar common tongue, her voice weak. "Please, help." Albert's mind raced through his options. The logical choice was clear: walk away. He barely had resources to sustain himself, and his filter was failing. Taking on the burden of a paralyzed alien would drastically reduce his own chances of survival. But as he looked at the desperate, hope in those violet eyes, memories of his fallen crew flashed through his mind. Harrison's final moments, gasping for air with a punctured lung. Samantha's eyes, vacant and staring as infection claimed her. Lynn's silent accusation as Albert failed to pull him from the wreckage before the flames reached him. "Damn it," Albert muttered, moving forward to examine the debris pinning the alien down. He wouldn't abandon another living being. Not again. The panel trapping her was heavy, some sort of metallic alloy that had once been part of the ceiling. Albert positioned himself and pushed with all his strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding protest, the panel shifted enough for him to see the alien's lower body. Her legs appeared intact, but completely motionless, even as the rest of her body tensed with pain. Not crushed, then some sort of spinal injury, perhaps. The alien girl watched him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "I'm going to get you out of here," Albert said, gesturing to emphasize his meaning. "But we need to move quickly. A radiation storm is coming." Indeed, the light filtering through the collapsed ceiling had taken on an ominous amber hue, the warning sign of the radioactive dust storms that swept through the region periodically. Albert had barely survived the last one by sealing himself in the remains of a subterranean shelter. If they were caught in the open when this one hit, neither would survive. The alien girl seemed to understand the urgency. She nodded and tried to help as Albert carefully maneuvered her from beneath the debris. Her legs dragged uselessly as he worked, confirming his suspicion about her paralysis. When finally free, she attempted to push herself up using only her arms, managing to sit upright through sheer determination. Albert knelt beside her. "I need to carry you. We won't make it otherwise." Though she clearly didn't understand all his words, she comprehended his intent when he motioned, lifting her. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, reaching up with trembling arms. Albert gathered her into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed, perhaps an adaptation to the planet's gravity, or maybe just the result of starvation. Her body was cool to the touch, lower than human body temperature, and she smelled faintly of something like ozone and crushed flowers. The pendant around her neck glowed brighter as she was moved, and Albert felt an odd sensation, like a whisper across his consciousness. Before he could ponder this, the first howl of the approaching storm reached them. "Hold on," he instructed, securing his grip. With the alien girl clutched against his chest, Albert raced through the ruins as the sky darkened to a toxic amber. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. Every step jostled her, and he could feel her body tense with pain, but not once did she cry out. The storm closed in behind them, a wall of swirling, luminescent dust that devoured everything in its path. Buildings disappeared into its maw, and the air filled with the screech of particles scraping against stone and metal. Albert's lungs burned as he pushed himself harder than he had in months, scanning desperately for shelter. His filter mask wheezed, the mechanisms struggling against the increased particulate matter. If it failed now, they were both dead. Just as the first tendrils of the storm reached them, stinging Albert's exposed skin, he spotted it. A maintenance hatch set into what had once been a transport hub, its door hanging partially open. With a final burst of desperate energy, he lunged for the opening, tumbling inside with the alien girl still clutched protectively in his arms. Using his foot, Albert kicked the hatch closed as the full fury of the storm engulfed their position. The ancient seal groaned but held, plunging them into near-total darkness, broken only by the faint glow of the alien's bioluminescent skin patterns and her pendant. In that soft blue light, their eyes met, hers filled with wonder and uncertainty, his with exhaustion and grim determination. Neither spoke as the storm raged outside, howling like a living entity denied its prey. Albert had made his choice. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined in this alien graveyard. As he listened to the tempest outside, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity: he would not let her die here. He had failed too many times before. This time would be different. The maintenance bunker turned out to be part of an old transit system hub, its walls lined with defunct control panels and burst conduits. Albert gently set the alien girl down on a relatively clean section of floor before exploring their temporary sanctuary. Using his wrist light, he inspected the space methodically, an old habit from his military training. The bunker extended farther than he'd initially thought, with narrow corridors branching off from the main chamber. Most importantly, it was sealed well enough to keep out the radioactive dust, though small amounts had already accumulated in corners and along the edges of the floor. "We're safe for now," Albert said, returning to the alien girl. The storm might last hours or days. She watched him with those unsettling violet eyes, her head tilted slightly as though trying to decipher his words. The bioluminescent patterns along her arms pulsed gently, casting shifting shadows on the metal walls. Albert rummaged through his pack and produced a water container. He yelled out to her, "Water, drink." The alien hesitated, then carefully took the container with slender, six-fingered hands. She examined it briefly before taking a cautious sip. Finding it acceptable, she drank more deeply, her throat working as she swallowed. When finished, she returned the container with a gesture that Albert interpreted as gratitude. "My name is Albert," he said, pointing to himself. "Albert." The alien touched her own chest. "Lyrae," she said, the name sounding like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Lyrae," Albert nodded, pleased to have established this small connection. "Lyrae," he repeated. He set about making their shelter more comfortable, spreading out his thermal blanket on the floor for Lyrae to rest on. The alien watched his every move with wary fascination. When he removed his filter mask to drink, Lyrae's eyes widened in alarm. She spoke rapidly in her crystalline language, gesturing at his face and then at the sealed door. "It's okay," Albert assured her, tapping the filtration unit on his mask. "This is failing anyway. The air in here is stale, but clean enough. No radiation." Though she couldn't understand his words, his calm demeanor seemed to reassure her. Lyrae relaxed slightly, though her gaze continued to track his movements. Albert checked his supplies: 3 days of emergency rations, 2 liters of water, basic medical supplies, and tools. Not much, but it would have to do until the storm passed. As he worked, Lyrae's pendant caught his attention again. The metal, if it was metal at all, seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury, but held its form. At its center pulsed a soft light that matched the rhythm of the luminescent patterns on her skin. Noticing his interest, Lyrae touched the pendant and spoke softly. Though he couldn't understand her words, the reverence in her tone was clear. This was something of great significance to her. As night fell outside, the only indication being the dimming of the amber light filtering through the few small vents, Albert activated a small light cube and placed it in the center of their space. The soft illumination revealed more details of his companion. Lyrae's clothing consisted of fitted bodysuit made from material that looked almost like woven metal, tarnished and torn in places. Her lower limbs remained completely still, arranged awkwardly where Albert had placed her. The contrast between her animated upper body and lifeless legs was stark and painful to observe. "What happened to you?" Albert asked, gesturing to her legs. Lyrae understood his question. Her expression darkened as she touched her spine, making a sharp, cracking motion with her hands. Then she gestured around them at the ruined city and drew a finger across her throat, the universal gesture for death. "Your people?" Albert asked. Lyrae nodded, her face tightening with emotion. She pointed upward, then made a sweeping motion with her arm, fingers spread, an explosion or disaster of some kind. Then she pointed to herself, touched her legs, and made a gesture of pushing away, her expression shifting to bitter resentment. The meaning became clear. Her people had abandoned her when disaster struck, left her behind because of her paralysis. Your family left you? Albert asked, his voice soft with disbelief. Lyra seemed to understand. She nodded once, sharply, her jaw tight. The luminescent patterns on her skin flared brighter for a moment, betraying her emotional state. Albert felt a surge of anger on her behalf. I'm sorry, he said, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping his tone conveyed his meaning. Lyra regarded him for a long moment, then reached out tentatively and touched his hand. The contact sent a strange, electric tingle up his arm, not unpleasant but alien. She spoke again, this time mixing her language with broken phrases of trade speak. You? Help Lyra. Why? Not. Same kind. The question hit Albert with surprising force. Why indeed? Every logical part of his mind had screamed to leave her to focus on his own survival. Yet here he was, sharing his meager supplies with an alien he'd just met, putting both their lives at greater risk. Because it was the right thing to do, he answered simply. Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. Then she placed her hand over her pendant and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she pointed to Albert's chest. Good. Here, she said. See. Pain. Here. She touched her own chest, then pointed back to Albert. Same. The insight startled him. Somehow, she had sensed his grief, his guilt over his lost crew. Perhaps her people had some form of empathic ability, or perhaps his pain was simply written so clearly on his face that even an alien could read it. Yes, Albert admitted quietly. There is pain. I lost people. My crew. I couldn't save them. Though she likely didn't understand all his words, Lyra nodded as if she comprehended perfectly. She reached out again, this time placing her cool hand directly over his heart. Her pendant glowed brighter, and Albert felt that strange whisper across his mind again, a sensation of shared understanding that transcended language. For the first time since the crash, the crushing weight of guilt eased slightly. In this alien girl's eyes, there was no accusation, no judgment, only recognition of a kindred spirit who knew what it meant to be left behind. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a violent rattling of the bunker door. The storm outside had intensified, battering their shelter with renewed fury. A thin stream of glowing dust seeped through one of the vents, spiraling in the air before settling on the floor. Lyra's eyes widened in alarm. She spoke rapidly, pointing at the dust and making an urgent slashing motion across her throat. I know, Albert said grimly. It's radioactive. We need to seal that vent. He quickly tore a strip from his blanket and, using a multi-tool from his pack, removed the vent cover and stuffed the fabric into the opening. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would reduce the infiltration of radioactive particles. When he returned to Lyra's side, she was examining his mask with concern. She pointed to the filtration unit, then to her own throat, making a choking gesture. Yes, it's failing, Albert confirmed. I've been looking for replacement parts. Lyra frowned in concentration, then her face brightened. She tapped her pendant, then mimed removing it and attaching it to the mask. She pointed to Albert, made a walking motion with her fingers, then pointed in a specific direction and mimed digging or searching. You know where I can find filter parts? Albert asked, his pulse quickening. Lyra nodded emphatically. She made a series of gestures, trying to describe a location, drawing shapes in the air that might represent buildings or landmarks. Albert studied her movements intently, trying to make sense of the directions. From what he could gather, she was indicating a place not far from where he'd found her, perhaps some kind of storage facility or workshop. Tomorrow, he said, pointing to his wrist as if at a watch, then at the door. When the storm ends, we'll go there. Lyra shook her head vehemently. She pointed to Albert, then to the door, then to herself and the floor. Her meaning was clear. She expected him to leave her behind. No, Albert said firmly. We go together or not at all. To emphasize his point, he moved closer and placed his hand on her shoulder, meeting her gaze steadily. In those alien eyes, he saw uncertainty warring with desperate hope. I won't abandon you, Lyra, he promised, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping she would feel their intent. Never. The pendant at her throat pulsed brightly, and her skin patterns rippled in what Albert was beginning to recognize as emotional response. She reached up and gripped his forearm with surprising strength, her 6 fingers wrapping completely around his wrist. A single tear, faintly luminescent like liquid starlight, traced down her blue-tinted cheek. No words passed between them, but in that moment, a fragile trust was born, a silent pact between 2 survivors in a dead world. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside, the storm continued to rage, a fitting backdrop to the desolation that surrounded them. But within the bunker, something new had taken root, a tenuous connection, as delicate as it was unexpected. In this alien graveyard, among the remnants of a fallen civilization, the first seeds of hope had begun to stir. When Albert awoke the next morning, he found Lirei already alert, her fingers working nimbly to repair a tear in her metallic clothing. She acknowledged him with a nod, but continued her work, using what appeared to be hair-thin filaments pulled from her outfit to stitch the fabric back together. The storm had diminished overnight, no longer hammering at their shelter, but still audible as a low, persistent moan outside. Albert checked the makeshift seal on the vent, still holding but deteriorating. They couldn't stay much longer. His filter mask lay where he'd left it, its mechanisms visibly corroded. Even if he could repair it, the filter element itself was nearly spent. Without a replacement, venturing outside would be suicide. How long? Albert asked Lirei, pointing to the door and making a circular motion with his finger to indicate the storm. Lirei paused her repair work and cocked her head, as if listening to something beyond human perception. She held up 3 fingers, then made a rising and setting motion with her hand. 3 days. Albert clarified with dismay. Lirei shook her head. She repeated the motion, then pointed to where the sun would be at mid-position. 3 hours. Albert translated, relieved. We can make it that long. He took inventory of their supplies again. The situation was becoming critical. They had water for perhaps 2 more days, if carefully rationed, and food for slightly longer. More pressing was his failing filtration system and the steady depletion of the emergency power cell that ran his few remaining pieces of functional equipment. And then there was Lirei. While her upper body seemed strong enough, her paralyzed legs would make travel difficult. Albert couldn't carry her indefinitely through the ruins, especially not while navigating hazards and potential hostiles. As if sensing his concerns, Lirei finished her repairs and dragged herself closer to him using just her arms, her legs trailing uselessly behind. The easy strength in her upper body suggested her people were naturally more powerful than humans, despite their seemingly fragile build. She gestured for Albert to show her the map he'd been compiling on his datapad, a crude layout of the ruins he'd explored so far. When he held it out, she studied it intently, then pointed to a location he hadn't yet visited. Market, she said in trade speak, the word clearly unpracticed on her tongue. Trade. Parts. Albert's eyebrows rose in surprise. A market? There are still people here. Lirei made a seesawing motion with her hand. Yes and no. She tapped her chest, then made a motion encompassing the ruins around them. Your people? Albert asked. Some Arvani survived? Lirei's expression darkened. She made the same pushing away gesture as before, then spat a phrase in her native tongue that needed no translation, a curse or expression of disgust. Not people, she struggled to explain in trade speak. Not good. Scavengers. Albert understood immediately. Not survivors maintaining civilization, but opportunists picking through the bones of the dead world. Likely dangerous and unpredictable. But they have parts? Things we need, he pressed. Lirei nodded firmly. She pointed to his mask, then to her legs, then made a walking motion with her fingers. Hope surged through Albert. If this market had filtration components, it might also have medical tech, perhaps even something to help Lirei walk again. It was a long shot, but better than their current prospects of slow death in the ruins. Can you guide me there? He asked, pointing between them and then to the location on the map. Lirei nodded again, determination hardening her features. She began drawing on the map with her finger, tracing routes through the ruins, marking locations with strange symbols. Albert watched carefully, committing each detail to memory. This would be their one chance at survival. As they prepared to leave, Albert fashioned a makeshift harness that would allow him to carry Lyrae on his back, leaving his hands free for climbing or defense if needed. The alien observed his work with keen interest, occasionally suggesting modifications with gestures or by demonstrating with the materials at hand. Her intelligence was evident, her understanding of practical mechanics impressive. Whatever her role had been in Arvani society, Lyrae was clearly educated and resourceful. Just as they finished preparations, the background howl of the storm quieted suddenly. Lyrae's head snapped up, her pupils dilating as she focused on sounds beyond Albert's perception. "It's over," he asked. Lyrae raised a hand for silence, continuing to listen. After a tense moment, she nodded and pointed to the door. "Now," she said in trade speak. "Quick!" Albert helped Lyrae into the harness, securing her against his back. Her weight was noticeable, but manageable, lighter than he'd expected. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her breath cool against his neck. "Ready?" he asked, adjusting his pack across his chest. In response, Lyrae touched her pendant. It flared briefly, and Albert felt a strange sensation flow through him, a temporary surge of energy and focus. She spoke softly in her language. The crystalline sounds like a blessing or a prayer. Albert took a deep breath, secured his failing mask across his face, and unsealed the bunker door. It swung open to reveal a transformed landscape. The storm had reshaped the ruins, erasing some landmarks while exposing others previously buried. Fresh layers of luminescent ash covered everything, giving the dead city an ethereal glow. The air was thick with particulate matter that would have choked him instantly without his mask, deteriorated as it was. With Lyrae's directions murmured into his ear, a combination of trade-speak words and taps on his shoulder to indicate direction, Albert set off toward the market she had described. Their journey took them deeper into the heart of the ruined city, through collapsed thoroughfares and beneath crumbling archways inscribed with flowing Arvani script. Occasionally, Lyrae would tense against his back, signaling danger. Each time, Albert would take cover just before patrol drones. Ancient security measures, still blindly following their programming, would sweep by. These relics were dangerous. He'd seen one incinerate a scavenging creature with a precise energy blast days earlier. 3 hours into their journey, Albert's mask began to fail more severely. Each breath became labored, the taste of metal and ash seeping through. His lungs burned, and spots danced at the edges of his vision. Lyrae sensed his distress immediately. She tapped urgently on his shoulder, directing him to a partially collapsed building nearby. Inside, the air was marginally clearer, some quirk of the ventilation system or structural design keeping the worst of the contamination at bay. Albert sank to his knees, struggling to breathe. Lyrae slipped from the harness and pulled herself around to face him. Without hesitation, she removed her pendant and pressed it against the intake valve of his mask. The effect was immediate and astonishing. The pendant seemed to liquefy partially, spreading across the filtration system like living mercury. The wheezing stopped, replaced by the smooth flow of purified air. Albert gulped it down gratefully, his vision clearing. "How did you?" he began, touching the transformed mask in wonder. "Nanotech," Lyrae explained haltingly. "Life. Metal. Temporary. Thank you," Albert said with feeling, understanding she had sacrificed something precious to save him. Lyrae smiled for the first time, a strange expression on her alien features but unmistakably warm. Without her pendant, the luminescent patterns on her skin pulsed more erratically, and she seemed slightly diminished, as though the artifact had been sustaining her in some way. "Not far now," she assured him, pointing toward what had once been the city's central district. "Market, there." After Albert had recovered sufficiently, they continued their journey. The makeshift repair to his mask functioned perfectly, though Lyrae warned it wouldn't last more than a day. The pendant's nanomaterial, was consuming itself to maintain the filtration. As they approached the central district, signs of recent activity became more apparent. Paths worn through the ash, crude markers painted on walls, and the occasional glint of surveillance devices hidden among the ruins. Leary directed Albert to stop before a massive, semi-collapsed structure that might once have been a transit hub or administrative center. Its grand facade was now a broken skeleton, but light, actual electric light, flickered dimly from deep within. Deep market, Leary whispered, the trade-speak term rolling awkwardly from her tongue. Careful. Dangerous. Albert helped her back into the harness, understanding they would present less of a target together than separated. He checked his makeshift weapon, a sharpened length of metal tubing he'd recovered from the crash site, and approached the entrance Leary indicated. A crude symbol had been painted beside a partially concealed doorway, an ellipse intersected by 3 vertical lines. Leary explained through gestures that this marked the entry point for outsiders seeking trade. As they passed through the doorway, darkness enveloped them momentarily before giving way to a scene Albert could scarcely have imagined still existing on this dead world. Deep Market occupied what had once been a subterranean transportation hub. Its vaulted ceilings, now cracked and sagging in places, rose high above a chaotic maze of improvised structures, stalls, shelters, and barricades constructed from salvage materials. Dim lighting came from a patchwork of ancient power systems and newer, crude generators that filled the air with chemical stink. Most shocking was the presence of life, diverse and abundant. Scavengers from at least a dozen species moved through the market. Humans like Albert, though far more weathered and feral-looking, various alien refugees, including a few Arvani, and even some biomechanical entities that blurred the line between living and artificial. My God! Albert breathed, taking in the sight. A whole community survived down here. Leary's grip on his shoulders tightened. Not community, she corrected tersely. Predators. Indeed, as Albert's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he began to notice the less savory aspects of the gathering. Armed guards stood at key positions, their weapons a mix of ancient energy weapons and crude but effective projectile firearms. Many of the market-goers bore visible scars or aggressive modifications, subdermal armor, enhanced sensory organs, weaponized limbs. This wasn't civilization rebuilding itself. This was humanity and its galactic neighbors at their most desperate, clinging to existence through exploitation and violence. How do we do this? Albert asked quietly, aware that they were already drawing attention. A clean-looking human carrying a paralyzed Arvani female was hardly an everyday sight, even in this den of oddities. Trade token, Leary murmured, reaching into a concealed pocket in her bodysuit. She produced a small crystalline chip that glowed with inner light. Value. Hi. For help. Albert nodded, understanding. They had something to barter with. The question was whether it would be enough, and whether they'd be allowed to leave with their purchases and their lives. They moved deeper into the market, Leary directing Albert with taps and whispered instructions. The various denizens watched them pass with predatory interest. Some called out in trade speak, offering black market services or demanding to know what they sought. Albert ignored them, keeping his gaze forward and his hand near his weapon. After navigating through several cramped corridors lined with makeshift stalls, they emerged into a larger chamber dominated by a central structure that might once have been a transit control booth. Now it served as the domain of a particularly unsettling figure, a being that appeared to be cobbled together from disparate parts, both biological and mechanical. Scrapper, Leary whispered, indicating this was their destination. As everything. Dangerous, but honest. Sometimes, the entity called Scrapper noticed their approach immediately, multiple optical implants swiveling to focus on them. What might once have been a humanoid face was now mostly synthetic, with only patches of mottled gray skin remaining around the jaw and forehead. When it spoke, the voice emerged from a vocoder embedded in its throat. Arvani, it observed the electronic voice crackling with interest. Rare these days. Thought your kind all fled upwards when the dust came down. The being leaned forward, optical units zooming with an audible whir. Ah, damaged goods. Left behind during the evacuation. Were you, little blue? Albert felt Lyrae stiffen against his back, but she remained silent. He stepped forward instead. We're looking to trade, he said firmly. Atmospheric filtration components and medical tech. Scrapper's optical units swiveled to examine Albert more closely. Fresh meat, it commented. Crash survivor, by the look of you. Not local scavenger stock. An unsettling laugh emerged from the vocoder. Filtration is scarce, friend. Everyone needs to breathe. As for medical tech, one mechanical limb gestured toward Lyrae. Neural interface regenerators for our Vani physiology? Even scarcer. Might have something that would work, might not. Depends on what you're offering. Lyrae reached around Albert's shoulder, holding out the crystalline chip. The effect on Scrapper was immediate. All optical units locked onto the small object, and a mechanical arm shot out with surprising speed to pluck it from Lyrae's fingers. Arvani, data, crystal, Scrapper breathed, the vocoder dropping to a lower register. Pre-collapse tech. Memory storage? Navigation charts? Access codes. Medical database, Lyrae said softly. Full. Untouched. Scrapper's optical units cycled through various scanning modes, verifying the authenticity of the chip. After a tense moment, the being tucked it away into a secured compartment in its chest. Wait here, it instructed, before disappearing into the back of the booth. While they waited, Albert murmured, Was that wise? Seems extremely valuable. Lyrae's voice was resigned. Last resort. Useless without. Reader. Need help more. Minutes later, Scrapper returned with 2 items. A compact filtration unit that looked significantly more advanced than Albert's failing system, and what appeared to be a set of complex mechanical braces. Military-grade atmospheric processor, Scrapper explained, holding up the filter. Arvani design, ironically. Self-cleaning nanofiber matrix. Will keep you breathing for years. The being then indicated the braces. Neural bypass framework. Not pretty, not perfect, but it'll reconnect signal to your legs, Blue Girl. Won't feel normal, but you'll walk. Albert examined both items carefully. The filtration unit appeared genuine and in good condition. The neural braces were more concerning, clearly salvaged and modified, with exposed wiring and crude connection points. How do we know these work? Albert demanded. Scrapper's mechanical shoulders approximated shrug. You don't, but your Arvani friend's data crystal is already payment enough to take the chance, isn't it? Either these help you survive, or you die in the ruins. Simple calculation. Albert glanced at Lyrae, who gave a small nod. They had no choice, and they both knew it. We'll take them, Albert said, reaching for the items. Scrapper held them back. One more thing, the being said, optical units narrowing. Installation. The braces need proper calibration to the Arvani nervous system. I can do it here. Part of the deal. Albert immediately tensed. No, we take them with us. Your funeral, Scrapper replied, mechanical limbs gesturing dismissively. Or rather, her permanent paralysis. These aren't plug-and-play, human. Requires precision neural mapping, connection to specific nerve clusters. Do it wrong, and she'll never walk. Might even lose function in her upper body, too. Lyrae leaned forward to whisper in Albert's ear. Truth. Need? Expert help. Albert hesitated, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. But Lyrae's quiet desperation was palpable, and the logic was sound. They lacked the expertise to install such complex medical technology. Fine, he conceded, but I stay with her the whole time. Scrapper made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Wouldn't have it any other way. Need you to monitor her vitals anyway. The being led them through a concealed doorway into what appeared to be a makeshift medical bay, a grotesque parody of a hospital room, with salvaged equipment and suspicious stains on the floors and walls. Various mechanical arms hung from the ceiling, and an examination table dominated the center of the space. Put her there, Scrapper instructed, already beginning to activate the equipment. Albert carefully removed Lyrae from the harness and laid her on the table. Her violet eyes were wide with fear but determined. She gripped Albert's hand briefly before letting go. "Wait outside," Scrapper said. "I stay." Albert responded firmly, hand moving to his weapon. Scrapper's optical units whirred as they focused on Albert's face. "Your choice. But what you're about to see isn't pretty. Our Vani neural structures are complex." Over the next 2 hours, Albert witnessed a procedure that would haunt his nightmares for years to come. Scrapper was skilled, certainly, but the process of connecting the neural braces to Lirai's spine and nervous system was brutal and primitive. The alien girl remained conscious throughout, apparently a necessity for proper neural mapping. And though she made barely a sound, her luminescent skin patterns flared erratically with each wave of pain. Albert held her hand through the worst of it, murmuring encouragement even though he knew she couldn't understand most of his words. The intimacy of sharing her suffering created a bond between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. When it was finally over, Scrapper stepped back, mechanical limbs retracting with a hydraulic hiss. "Done. Give it an hour for the initial connections to stabilize. She'll need to learn to use the interface. Won't be natural at first." Lirai lay exhausted on the table, her skin patterns pulsing weakly. The braces encased her lower body from waist to ankles, an intricate framework of metal, circuitry, and what appeared to be synthetic muscle tissue. "Will she recover fully?" Albert asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Scrapper made that mechanical shrugging motion again. "Define fully. She'll walk, run, eventually maybe, but perfect Arvani grace? No, those days are gone. This is survival tech, not restoration." Albert nodded grimly. In this dead world, survival was victory enough. As they prepared to leave, Scrapper held out the new filtration unit. "Just press it against your existing mask housing. It'll integrate automatically." Albert did as instructed and felt the immediate improvement as clean air rushed into his lungs. For the first time in weeks, he could breathe without the taste of ash and metal. "Our business is concluded," Scrapper stated, already losing interest as another potential customer approached the booth. "Word of advice, leave deep market quickly. You're carrying valuable tech now, and not everyone here respects completed transactions." Albert understood the warning. He carefully helped Lirai back into the harness, her legs still unresponsive as the neural connections established themselves. They needed to find shelter before attempting to activate the braces fully. They had nearly reached the market's exit when trouble found them. 3 figures blocked their path, 2 humans and what appeared to be a heavily augmented Karn, a species known for their aggression and physical prowess. "Heard Scrapper got a nice Arvani data crystal today," one of the humans said, tapping a crude shock baton against his thigh. "And look what we have here, an Arvani. Coincidence?" Albert shifted his stance, ready to fight. "We've completed our business. Move aside." The Karn growled, metal-reinforced teeth gleaming in the dim light. "New rule. Exit tax. Whatever you're carrying plus the blue girl. Otherwise, you leave in pieces." Albert felt Lirai's arms tighten around his neck. Without hesitation, he drew his makeshift blade. "I don't think so." What followed was a desperate, brutal conflict. Albert was trained for combat, but outnumbered and encumbered by Lirai on his back. He managed to incapacitate one human with a lucky strike to the throat, but the other attacker and the Karn pressed their advantage. The turning point came unexpectedly. As the Karn lunged forward, Lirai suddenly swung her body, using the harness as leverage. The movement threw Albert off balance, but caught their attacker by surprise. In the split second of confusion, Lirai thrust her hand forward, fingers splayed, and her pendant, which had been reconstructing itself since being used to repair Albert's mask, shot forward as a spray of liquid metal. The substance engulfed the Karn's face, hardening instantly. The creature clawed frantically at the metallic shell before collapsing, unable to breathe. The remaining human attacker, witnessing this display of unknown technology, retreated hastily into the market depths. Albert stared in shock at the fallen Karn, then at Lirai. What was that? Arvani. Defense, she managed, clearly drained by the effort. Pendant. Protect. They didn't wait for more trouble. Albert hurried through the exit, carrying Lyrae back into the ruins of the dead city. They needed distance from Deep Market and its predators before attempting to rest. An hour later, they found temporary shelter in what had once been a residential tower. Albert secured a small apartment on the 15th floor, high enough to see approaching danger, but not so high as to be exposed to the worst of the radioactive winds. As he gently laid Lyrae on a dusty couch, he noticed her pendant had almost completely reconstituted itself, though it pulsed more weakly than before. "That thing saved us," Albert said, gesturing to the artifact. "What exactly is it?" Lyrae touched the pendant lovingly. "Soul metal," she explained haltingly. "Arvani. Life force. Connected to me. Two ancestors." Albert sat beside her, processing this revelation. "It's alive." "Yes." "No." "Both." Lyrae struggled to find words and trade speak. "Memory. Purpose. Protection." Before Albert could inquire further, Lyrae shifted her attention to the neural braces. "Time," she said, determination hardening her features. "Must try. Help me." Albert nodded, helping her into a sitting position. Following her instructions, he activated the primary control node located at the small of her back. The braces hummed to life, lights flickering along their length as they established connection with her nervous system. Lyrae gasped, her back arching involuntarily. The luminescent patterns on her skin flared brightly, racing from her torso down toward her legs. For several tense minutes, she breathed in sharp, shallow pants, her eyes squeezed shut in concentration or pain. Then slowly, with agonizing effort, her right foot moved. Just a twitch at first, then a more deliberate flex. Tears of luminescent fluid streaked down her blue-tinted cheeks. "It works," she whispered, a lifetime of emotion packed into those two words. Albert felt his own eyes stinging. "Take it slow," he cautioned, supporting her as she struggled to swing her legs off the couch. "Stand," Lyrae insisted, gripping his arms. "Help me stand." With Albert's support, she pulled herself upright. The braces whirred and clicked as they adjusted to her weight, compensating for atrophied muscles and damaged nerves. Lyrae's legs trembled violently, but held. She took one stumbling step forward, then another, her grip on Albert's arms like iron. Her face contorted with effort and pain, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. A third step, a fourth, and then her legs gave out. Albert caught her before she could fall, holding her slight form against his chest. But instead of frustration, Lyrae's face shone with joy. She looked up at Albert, their faces inches apart. "I walk," she said simply, wonder filling her voice. "Again, I walk." In that moment of shared triumph, something shifted between them. Albert found himself acutely aware of her alien beauty, so different from human features yet undeniably captivating. Her violet eyes held his, and her hand moved to touch his face with gentle curiosity. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibility. Then Lyrae's pendant flared suddenly, pulsing in time with her rapidly beating heart, and she drew back slightly, a look of confusion crossing her features. "Rest now," Albert said gently, helping her back to the couch. "We'll practice more tomorrow." That night, as Lyrae slept, Albert stood by the cracked window of their temporary shelter, staring out at the desolate cityscape bathed in the eerie glow of radioactive dust. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble of practical concerns and unexpected emotions. They had achieved two critical goals today. His filtration system was repaired, and Lyrae had the means to walk again. But survival remained a precarious proposition in this dead world. And now, complicating matters further, were these growing feelings for an alien woman he'd only just met. Albert sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Was this just desperate human connection, in the face of isolation? Or something more significant? Did she even perceive emotions the way humans did? As if sensing his turmoil, Lyrae stirred in her sleep, the luminescent patterns on her skin pulsing gently. Albert watched her for a moment, then returned his gaze to the ruined city. Whatever was developing between them would have to wait. First, they needed a plan beyond day-to-day survival. a way forward in this graveyard world. With that thought in mind, Albert began to formulate their next steps. They would need supplies, more permanent shelter, and eventually a way to contact any other survivors. The crashed remains of his ship still contained a long-range communication array. If repaired, it might reach orbital relays or passing vessels. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was a start. A path forward, however tenuous. And for the first time since the crash, Albert felt something akin to hope stir within him. Not just for survival, but for the possibility of building something meaningful from the ashes of this dead civilization. He glanced back at Lyrae's sleeping form. Together, perhaps they could find a way to truly live, not just exist among the ruins. Dawn broke over the dead city, the light filtering through toxic clouds, creating an unsettling amber glow that reflected off the ever-present ash. Albert had managed a few hours of restless sleep, his mind racing with plans and contingencies for their continued survival. He awoke to find Lyrae already up, laboriously practicing with her new braces. She stood beside the couch, one hand braced against the wall for support, taking careful, measured steps. The neural framework hummed and clicked as it responded to her commands, the synthetic muscles flexing beneath the metal scaffolding. "You should rest more," Albert said, rising from his makeshift bed on the floor. Lyrae shook her head stubbornly. "Must practice. Become strong." She took another step, wobbling slightly but catching herself. "See? Better already." Indeed, her movements were smoother than the previous day, though still halting and mechanical. The neural interface was adapting to her nervous system, and her determination was paying off. "We need supplies," Albert said, retrieving his pack. "Food, water, tools. I saw storage facilities in the lower levels of this building. Worth checking." Lyrae nodded agreement. "I come too." "Practice walking." Albert hesitated. "It might be dangerous. Unstable structures, maybe other scavengers." Together, Lyrae said firmly, her violet eyes brooking no argument. "Safer together." He couldn't deny her logic. Two pairs of eyes were better than one, and despite her disability, Lyrae had already proven herself resourceful and capable of self-defense. Plus, the alien seemed to have heightened senses that had already saved them more than once. Together, Albert agreed, helping her secure the external fastenings of the neural braces. "But we move at your pace, and you tell me when you need a rest." Lyrae's skin patterns pulsed with what Albert was beginning to recognize as satisfaction or pleasure. "Deal," she said, the trade-speak word sounding more natural on her tongue than before. They ventured from their temporary shelter into the residential tower's central corridor. Emergency lighting still functioned sporadically, casting long shadows across the dusty hallway. Albert led the way, his makeshift blade ready in one hand, while Lyrae followed a few paces behind, moving slowly but with growing confidence. The lower levels of the building proved to be a treasure trove of abandoned supplies. Most perishables had long since rotted away, but they found sealed containers of preserved Arvani foodstuffs, water purification tablets, and various tools that had survived the calamity. Most valuable was a cache of medical supplies, antibacterial agents, wound sealants, and pain relievers compatible with both human and Arvani physiology. Albert packed these carefully, knowing infection or injury could be a death sentence in their situation. As they searched, Lyrae's pendant occasionally pulsed, guiding them to hidden storage compartments or particularly valuable items. The connection between the artifact and its wearer remained mysterious to Albert, but he couldn't deny its usefulness. "Your pendant," Albert said as they paused for Lyrae to rest. "How does it work?" "It seems almost sentient." Lyrae touched the artifact thoughtfully. "Not sentient, not like you and me, but aware, holds memories of ancestors, knowledge, protects family line, and it could transform, like it did with my mask and against the Karn." She nodded. "Soul metal adapts. Serves needs a bearer, but energy, limited, must regenerate." Albert considered this, fascinated by the technology, if technology was even the right word. It seemed more like a fusion of advanced science and something almost mystical beyond his understanding. "Your people," The Arvani. What happened to them, he asked. Gently, sensing this might be a painful subject, Lyrae's expression darkened. She gestured to the ruined city around them. Pride. Arrogance. Played with forces. Too powerful. Split the sky. Poison world. Some kind of weapon. Albert guessed. Or energy experiment gone wrong. Both. Neither. Lyrae struggled with the concepts in trade speak. Tried to make. Gateway. Between worlds. Between times. Failure. Catastrophic. Her voice turned bitter. Leaders knew danger coming. Evacuated elites. Left others to die. That's why they abandoned you, Albert said softly. Because of your paralysis? Lyrae nodded, anger and old pain evident in her expression. Arvani value. Perfection. Physical strength. I was liability. Own family. She made a sharp cutting motion with her hand. Left behind. 2D. The casual cruelty of it shocked Albert, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Humanity had its own dark history of abandoning the vulnerable when disaster struck. I'm sorry, he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. Lyrae regarded him with those alien violet eyes. Why help me? Truth. The directness of the question caught Albert off guard. He considered deflecting, but decided she deserved honesty. At first, it was guilt, he admitted. I couldn't save my crew when our ship crashed. 3 good people died while I survived. Finding you, helping you, maybe was a way to atone. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But now, that's because I've come to care about what happens to you, Lyrae. Not just because you're another survivor, but because of who you are, your courage, your determination. Even paralyzed and abandoned, you never gave up. The luminescent patterns on Lyrae's skin shifted, flowing in complex patterns that Albert couldn't interpret. She reached out and touched his hand, her 6 fingers enveloping his 5 in a gentle grip. Albert, good person, she said softly. Rare thing. In any world. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Then a sudden crash from floors below shattered the silence. Both froze, listening intently. Voices drifted up from the lower levels, rough, angry voices speaking a pidgin mix of languages. Scavengers, Lyrae whispered, her body tensing. Many. Albert cursed under his breath. They had lingered too long. Can you move quickly if needed? He asked, already calculating escape routes. Lyrae gave a sharp nod, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. The neural braces had improved her mobility, but running was likely beyond her current capabilities. Back to our shelter, Albert decided. Gather what we've found and move quietly. If they're working their way up, we'll need to find another exit. They hastily packed their salvage supplies and began the careful ascent back to their temporary haven on the 15th floor. Lyrae moved as swiftly as her braces allowed, occasionally requiring Albert's support on steeper sections. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the sounds of destructive searching, furniture being overturned, doors being forced open. The scavengers were thorough and moving fast. 2 floors below their shelter, disaster struck. Lyrae's right brace seized momentarily, causing her to stumble against a partially collapsed wall section. The weakened structure gave way with a thunderous crash, sending debris cascading down the central shaft of the building. Silence fell for one terrible moment. Then shouts of alarm erupted from below, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Run, Albert urged, supporting Lyrae as they abandoned stealth for speed. Whatever happens, keep moving toward the shelter. They barely reached their apartment before the first scavengers appeared at the far end of the corridor. Albert slammed the door shut, securing it with a length of metal pipe through the handles. It wouldn't hold for long, but might buy them precious minutes. The window, he directed, already gathering their essential supplies. There's a maintenance ladder on the exterior wall. We can reach the roof. Lyrae looked at the narrow window and the precipitous drop beyond, then at her braces. Fear flashed across her features, but she steeled herself, nodding grimly. Albert helped her through first, supported her weight until she had a firm grip on the rusted ladder rungs. The metal groaned ominously, but held as she began to climb, her movements slow but determined. Just as Albert prepared to follow, the door burst inward. 3 scavengers charged into the apartment. 2 humans and something that might once have been human but was now more machine than man. With no time to climb out, Albert was forced to stand his ground. He lunged forward with his blade, catching the first attacker by surprise and opening a deep gash across his chest. The man fell back, howling in pain. The second human fired some kind of jury-rigged energy weapon. Albert ducked, feeling the heat of the discharge pass inches from his head. It struck the wall behind him, melting through the ancient material with alarming ease. The cybernetic attacker proved the most dangerous. Moving with unnatural speed, it flanked Albert and struck with a reinforced arm, catching him across the ribs. Pain exploded through his side as something cracked. Albert staggered, nearly losing his grip on his weapon. From the window came Lyrae's voice, calling his name in panic. The distraction nearly cost him his life as the energy weapon discharged again, this time grazing his shoulder. The smell of burning flesh filled the room, accompanied by a pain so intense it momentarily blinded him. Desperate, Albert charged forward, driving his blade deep into the chest of the human wielding the energy weapon. The man collapsed, the weapon discharging once more as he fell, this time striking his cybernetic companion. The machine man jerked violently as electrical systems overloaded, then toppled backwards, circuits sparking. The first attacker, though wounded, was struggling back to his feet. Albert didn't wait to engage him again. Clutching his injured side, he staggered to the window and forced himself through, nearly falling as pain threatened to overwhelm him. The maintenance ladder swayed dangerously under their combined weight as Albert joined Lyrae. Below, more scavengers were pouring into the building. Above, the roof access was tantalizingly close. "Go," Albert urged, fighting through the pain. "I'm right behind you." Each rung was agony as they climbed higher, the metal ladder protesting with every movement. Lyrae's braces scraped and caught on the rusted structure, but she pushed onward, her determination unflagging. They reached the roof seconds before the first scavengers appeared at the window below. Albert dragged himself over the edge, then helped pull Lyrae up after him. Together they collapsed on the rooftop, gasping for breath. "You hurt," Lyrae observed, her violet eyes widening at the sight of the energy weapon burn on Albert's shoulder and the way he clutched his ribs. "I'll live," Albert managed, though the pain threatened to prove him a liar. "We need to keep moving. Find another building to cross to." Lyrae shook her head firmly. "First, treat wounds." She opened one of their salvage medical kits and selected a wound sealant spray and pain reliever. With gentle but efficient movements, she applied both to Albert's injuries. The relief was almost instantaneous. The pain medication spread cool numbness through his damaged tissue, while the sealant formed a protective barrier over the burn. "Thank you," Albert said, gingerly testing his range of motion. The ribs were still cracked, but now manageable. "We should." A projectile whistled past his head, embedding itself in the rooftop barrier behind them. The scavengers had reached the roof access point. "No time," Lyrae said, pulling Albert to his feet with surprising strength. "This way." She led him toward the far edge of the roof, where the building stood close to a neighboring structure, close but not touching. A gap of perhaps 3 meters separated them from potential safety. Albert stared at the gap, then at Lyrae. "Can your braces handle that jump?" Lyrae's face showed uncertainty for a moment, but then hardened with resolve. Only one way to know. Before Albert could protest, she backed up several steps, then ran forward, her gait uneven but functional, and leapt across the gap. For one heart-stopping moment, she hung in the air, then crashed onto the neighboring rooftop, rolling awkwardly as the braces struggled to absorb the impact. "Lyrae!" Albert called out in alarm. She pushed herself up, visibly shaken but intact. "Jump," she urged, as more projectiles whistled around them. Albert didn't hesitate. Ignoring the protest from his injured ribs, he ran and launched himself across the divide. His landing was marginally more graceful than Lyrae's, though the impact sent fresh waves of pain through his injured side. Together, they staggered away from the edge, seeking cover behind a rooftop ventilation unit. The scavengers on the adjacent building shouted in frustration, unwilling to attempt the dangerous jump. "We lost them," Albert observed, peering cautiously around their shelter. "For now," Lirei nodded, then gestured toward a rooftop access door. Inside, safer. The building they'd escaped to appeared to have been some sort of commercial structure, offices or shops, now long abandoned. They made their way down through empty corridors and ransacked rooms, alert for any signs of danger. As night fell, they found temporary sanctuary in a secure interior room with only one entrance. Albert used their remaining supplies to treat his wounds more thoroughly, while Lirei checked her neural braces for damage. "Jump damaged calibration," she reported, frustration evident in her voice. "Reduced function. Need tools to repair." Albert nodded grimly. This was a setback, but not insurmountable. "We'll find what you need. But first, we need to rest and recover." As he settled back against the wall, exhaustion threatening to overcome him, Albert realized their situation had become even more precarious. The scavengers would be hunting them now, and with his injuries and Lirei's compromised mobility, they were vulnerable. They needed a more permanent solution, a sanctuary beyond the reach of predators, somewhere they could properly recover and plan their next steps. "Lirei," Albert said, an idea forming. "Your people, the Arvani who survived, where did they go?" "You mentioned evacuation." Lirei's expression darkened. "Orbital platforms, then deep space, colony ships. Are there any Arvani facilities still operational? Research outposts, emergency bunkers?" She was silent for a long moment, considering. Then her pendant pulsed softly, and her eyes widened with sudden realization. "Sanctuary," she whispered, the word filled with hope and uncertainty. "Forgotten place. Far from city. Hidden." Albert leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his side. "A place we could reach? Safely." Lirei nodded slowly. "Difficult journey. Dangerous. But possible." It wasn't much, a distant hope, a desperate gamble. But as Albert looked at their dwindling supplies and thought of the scavengers hunting them, he knew they had no better option. "Tomorrow," he decided, "we rest a night, gather whatever supplies we can find in this building. Then we head for this sanctuary." Lirei reached out, taking his hand in hers. The gesture had become familiar between them, a silent communication of trust and solidarity. "Together," she affirmed, her violet eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. "Together," Albert agreed, squeezing her six-fingered hand gently. Outside, the dead city groaned and shifted as night winds stirred the radioactive ash. Inside their temporary haven, two beings from different worlds clung to a fragile hope that somewhere beyond the ruins lay the possibility of not just survival, but renewal. The journey to the Arvani sanctuary proved every bit as harrowing as Lirei had warned. For 6 grueling days, they navigated through the ruins and out into the wasteland beyond, guided by Lirei's pendant and fragmented memories of her world before the cataclysm. Albert's injuries slowed them considerably. Despite Lirei's expert application of the Arvani medical supplies, his ribs remained painful, and the energy weapon burn throbbed relentlessly. Still, he pushed onward, driven by the knowledge that remaining in the city meant certain death. Lirei faced her own challenges. The neural braces continued to degrade, requiring daily adjustments and crude repairs. By the 4th day, her right leg had lost nearly all function, forcing her to develop an awkward, hopping gait supported by a makeshift crutch Albert had fashioned from scavenged materials. Their journey took them through landscapes of increasing desolation, vast plains of gray ash interrupted only by skeletal remains of Arvani structures or the occasional twisted form of petrified vegetation. Twice they were forced to take shelter from radioactive storms, huddling in the ruins of roadside structures as toxic winds howled around them. Water became their most precious resource. Albert's filtration equipment could process the contaminated groundwater they occasionally found, but each session drained power they couldn't easily replace. Food supplies dwindled to critical levels despite careful rationing. On the seventh day, as they crested a ridge overlooking a deep valley, Lirai's pendant flared with sudden brightness. She gasped, clutching the artifact as it pulsed with frantic energy. "Close," she whispered, excitement and trepidation mingling in her voice. Sanctuary calls to pendant. Ancient connection. Albert surveyed the valley below. Unlike the ash-covered plains they traversed, this area showed signs of recovery. Patches of strange, blue-green vegetation grew in protected areas, and a narrow stream wound its way through the center, its water clearer than any they'd seen since beginning their journey. No buildings, Albert observed, scanning the landscape. Where exactly is this sanctuary? Lirai pointed to a seemingly unremarkable hillside on the far side of the valley. Underground. Hidden. Safe. They made their way down the treacherous slope, careful to avoid disturbing the loose ash that could trigger slides. As they approached the stream, Albert's filtration mask detected significantly lower radiation levels. Some natural feature of the valley appeared to be shielding it from the worst contamination. The hillside Lirai had indicated appeared ordinary at first glance. A gentle rise covered with the same blue-green vegetation they'd observed elsewhere in the valley. But as they drew closer, Albert noticed subtle irregularities in the terrain. Perfectly straight lines nearly hidden by growth, and geometric patterns too precise to be natural. L'iris pendant glaude increasingly bright. As they approached, seemingly responding to some unseen signal. When they reached the base of the hill, she placed the artifact against a particular section of stone that appeared indistinguishable from its surroundings. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a seam appeared in the hillside, widening into a doorway large enough for them to enter. Cool, filtered air wafted from within, the first truly clean air Albert had breathed since the crash without his mask. Arvani biometric security, Lirai explained, her voice filled with wonder. Reconnaissez pendant. Family line. They stepped into a short corridor that sloped gently downward, the stone walls inscribed with flowing Arvani script that pulsed with faint luminescence. As they moved deeper, the door sealed seamlessly behind them, leaving no trace of its existence. The corridor opened into a vast underground chamber that took Albert's breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, embedded with crystals that emitted a soft, natural light. The walls were a harmonious blend of stone and what appeared to be living material, pulsing membranes and organic circuitry interwoven with more conventional technology. At the center of the chamber stood a cluster of structures reminiscent of buildings, though their fluid, organic architecture bore little resemblance to human construction. Surrounding these structures were plots of cultivated soil supporting various plants, some recognizable as food crops, others completely alien to Albert's eyes. Arvani Emergency Sanctuary, Lirai said, her voice hushed with awe. Self-sustaining. Designed to survive. Catastrophe. It's beautiful, Albert whispered, taking in the serene underground ecosystem. But is anyone else here? Lirai shook her head sadly. Penna would sense them. We are alone. The significance of her words struck Albert with sudden force. This wasn't just an emergency shelter. It was a seed vault, a preservation chamber for Arvani civilization. The fact that it remained untouched suggested that those who knew of its existence had either never returned or had perished before they could. Your family didn't know about this place? He asked gently. Lirai's expression hardened. Knew. Chose evacuation instead. Status. Power more important than heritage. She gestured to the sanctuary around them. This place for caretakers. Lower class. Not elite. Albert nodded in understanding. Even facing extinction, social hierarchies had prevailed. The powerful had fled to the stars, abandoning not just individuals like Lirai, but their own cultural legacy. They explored the sanctuary carefully, discovering sleeping quarters, food storage areas, and most importantly, a medical facility equipped with Arvani technology far more sophisticated than anything they'd encountered in Deep Market. In the medical chamber, Lirai found what she'd been hoping for, a neural regeneration unit designed specifically for our Vani physiology. With Albert's help, she removed the crude braces Scrapper had installed and positioned herself within the unit's embrace. "We'll restore neural pathways," she explained as the machine hummed to life. "Better than braces. Real healing." Albert watched in fascination as the unit scanned Lirai's body. Holographic displays showing detailed images of her spine and nervous system. Areas of damage glowed red, while the machine methodically plotted repair protocols. "How long?" he asked. "Days. Weeks. Depends on damage." Lirai looked up at him, suddenly vulnerable. "Will you stay while I heal?" The question seemed to hold more significance than its surface meaning. Albert reached out, taking her hand as he had so many times during their journey. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "This sanctuary, it could be our home now. A place to rebuild, to live rather than just survive." Lirai's skin patterns pulsed with emotion. "Home," she repeated, as though testing the word. "Together?" Albert nodded, feeling a certainty he hadn't experienced since before the crash. Together. As the neural regeneration unit began its work, Albert explored more of the sanctuary, discovering systems designed to maintain the underground environment indefinitely. Power came from geothermal sources deep beneath the surface. Water was recycled and purified through living filtration systems, and the agricultural plots used artificial lighting calibrated to support both Arvani and compatible off-world crops. Most importantly, he found a communication array, dormant but intact, that might be modified to broadcast on frequencies used by passing ships or distant colonies. Hope, long suppressed, began to bloom within him. Over the following weeks, life developed a rhythm unlike anything Albert had known since the crash. Each day brought improvements to Lirai's condition as the neural regenerator worked its healing magic. First came increased sensation in her lower limbs, then tentative movement, and finally the ability to stand and walk short distances without support. Albert's own injuries healed as well, aided by our Vani medical technology that accelerated tissue regeneration and reduced scarring. Together, they explored every aspect of the sanctuary, learning its systems and capabilities, gradually transforming it from an abandoned relic into a living home. The bond between them deepened as they worked side by side. What had begun as a desperate alliance, forged in survival, evolved into something far more profound. Albert found himself captivated not just by Lirai's alien beauty, but by her resilience, intelligence, and the depth of emotion she expressed through both words and the luminescent patterns that danced across her skin. For Lirai, Albert represented everything her own people had failed to be: compassionate, loyal, and valuing life regardless of its form or perceived utility. The human who had carried her through a dead city when she couldn't walk had carried something else as well: hope that not all sentient beings were like those who had abandoned her. One evening, as they sat together in the sanctuary's central garden, watching the artificial daylight cycle into night mode, Lirai took Albert's hand. Her movements were more fluid now, the neural regeneration having restored much of her natural grace. "Why you came to my world?" she asked, her tradespeak having improved significantly through their constant communication. Before crash, Albert sighed, memories of his mission surfacing. "I was part of a survey team. We detected unusual energy signatures from this planet, residual patterns from the cataclysm, though we didn't know that then. We were scientists, explorers, not soldiers," Lirai asked, studying his face. "No, though we had basic combat training. Standard protocol for unknown worlds." He smiled ruefully. "Not that it helped much when our ship was damaged entering orbit." Lirai nodded thoughtfully, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Your world, Earth, is it like this one?" Before disaster, Albert considered how to describe Earth to someone who had never seen it. "In some ways, we have cities, technology, different cultures, and species coexisting. But physically, it's very different. More water, different plants, and atmosphere. Beautiful." Lirai pressed, her violet eyes intent. "Yes," Albert said softly. "Very beautiful in its own way." though we've damaged parts of it through carelessness, much like what happened here. Lyrae was silent for a moment, absorbing this. You miss it. You're home. It wasn't a question, but Albert answered anyway. I do, but I've accepted I may never see it again. The communication array, Lyrae reminded him, could reach your people. They had been working intermittently on the sanctuary's ancient communication system, adapting it to broadcast on frequencies used by Earth and allied worlds. Progress was slow, but promising. Maybe, Albert conceded, if any ships pass within range, if the signal can penetrate the atmospheric interference. Lyrae's pendant pulsed gently, matching the rhythm of the luminescent patterns flowing across her skin. If signal reaches them, would you go? Leave his place? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Albert turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Not without you, he said firmly. Never without you. The patterns on Lyrae's skin flared brilliantly, her emotion too complex for words. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his in an Arvani gesture of deep connection. Albert, she whispered, his name transformed into something musical in her voice. Became my world. When Old One died, their first kiss was tentative, exploratory, an intimate contact between two species never meant to meet, yet who had found in each other something transcendent. Her lips were cooler than human temperature, with a faint taste like ozone and honey, but the emotion behind the contact needed no translation. In the days that followed, their relationship blossomed like the alien flowers in the sanctuary's garden. They continued their work revitalizing the sanctuary while discussing possibilities for the future, whether that meant remaining in their underground haven or eventually attempting to reach broader civilization. 3 months after finding the sanctuary, their decision was forced by unexpected circumstances. Albert was tending the agricultural plots when the sanctuary's ancient alert system activated, bathing the central chamber in pulsing amber light. He rushed to the monitoring station where Lyrae was already reviewing holographic displays. Surface sensors detect ships, she reported, her voice tight with tension. Multiple, entering atmosphere. Albert examined the readings, his pulse quickening. Military configuration. Not Earth vessels. The design is unfamiliar. Lyrae's hands moved rapidly over the control interface, enhancing sensor data. Scavengers, she concluded grimly. Deep market. Large. Operation. The implications were clear and disturbing. The scavengers had organized, pooled resources, and were now conducting systematic exploration of the region. Whether they were specifically hunting for Albert and Lyrae or simply expanding their territory was immaterial. If they discovered the sanctuary, they would strip it bare. Can they detect us? Albert asked, studying the ship's projected path. Lyrae shook her head. Sanctuary shielded. But if they search with ground teams? She left the thought unfinished. They had 2 choices, hide and hope the scavengers pass them by, or take more decisive action. Neither option offered guarantees. The communication array, Albert said suddenly. Is it operational? Lyrae nodded cautiously. Basic functionality restored, but signal strength limited. If we divert power from non-essential systems, could we boost it? Create a pull strong enough to reach orbit or beyond. Understanding dawned in Lyrae's violet eyes. Distress call. Might attract help, or alert the scavengers to our exact location. Albert acknowledged grimly. It's a gamble. They debated briefly, weighing the risks against the growing certainty that their sanctuary would eventually be discovered regardless. In the end, the decision was unanimous. They would broadcast their distress call and hope friendly forces responded before the scavengers traced the signal. Working together, they reconfigured the sanctuary's power distribution, channeling energy from environmental and auxiliary systems into the communication array. The ancient technology protested this sudden surge, components glowing with strain as they prepared the broadband distress message. Ready, Lyrae announced, her hand poised over the activation control. Once initiated, cannot stop without total system reset. Albert moved to stand beside her, placing his hand over hers. Together, he said, their old affirmation now carrying deeper meaning. Together, she agreed, and they pressed the control as one. The sanctuary dimmed momentarily as power surged into the communication array. Deep within the hillside, amplifiers that had lain dormant for decades roared to life, broadcasting their desperate plea across multiple frequencies. The message was simple: coordinates, a request for evacuation, and identification code from Albert's crashed vessel. Almost immediately, sensors detected a response, but not the one they had hoped for. The scavenger ships altered course, converging on the valley. They received the signal, Albert said, watching the holographic display with grim resignation. And they're coming to investigate. Lyrae's expression hardened with determination. Sanctuary has defenses, dormant but functional. I can activate. The defensive systems were rudimentary by military standards, automated deterrents designed to discourage wildlife or unauthorized visitors rather than repel an armed assault. Still, they might buy precious time if help was indeed coming. As they prepared for the inevitable confrontation, a new alert sounded, this one different in tone and urgency. Lyrae rushed to the monitoring station, her movements fluid and graceful now that her neural pathways had largely regenerated. New vessel detected, she reported, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Orbital approach. Military configuration, but... She looked up, wonder filling her violet eyes. Earth registry. Albert could scarcely believe it. A human ship? Here. The holographic display shifted to show a sleek vessel entering atmosphere, a design Albert recognized as a response cruiser from Earth's colonial protection fleet. By some miracle, their signal had reached friendly forces in the vicinity. They're broadcasting, Lyrae announced, activating the communication channel. A human voice, crisp and professional, filled the sanctuary. Attention, underground facility. This is Captain Rhodes of the Earth Vessel Sentinel. We received your distress call and are moving to your position. Be advised, we have detected hostile craft converging on your location. Can you hold position? Albert activated the response channel. Captain Rhodes, this is Scientific Officer Albert Chun of the Survey Vessel Horizon. My ship crashed here 3 months ago. I'm with a native Arvani survivor. We have minimal defenses, but are in a secure underground facility. The hostiles are scavengers from a black market operation deeper in the ruins. Understood, Officer Chun came in response. We're accelerating our approach. Maintain your position and prepare for extraction. Sentinel out. Hope surged through Albert, tempered with caution. The Sentinel was still minutes away, while the scavenger ships were almost upon them. As if reading his thoughts, Lyrae placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Sanctuary will protect us, she said with quiet confidence. Has done so for generations. They activated the defensive systems, then sealed themselves in the central chamber, the most protected area of the facility. Through monitoring stations, they watched as the first scavenger teams landed in the valley and began searching for the source of the transmission. The sanctuary's outer defenses engaged automatically as intruders approached. Sonic deterrents, localized electromagnetic pulses, and non-lethal chemical repellents deployed from concealed emplacements. The scavengers, though initially confused, quickly realized they were dealing with automated systems and began methodically neutralizing the defenses. They're getting closer, Albert observed grimly as one team discovered a subtle seam in the hillside that marked the sanctuary's main entrance. Lyrae's pendant pulsed with increasing intensity, responding to her emotional state and the facility's distress. She placed her hand over it, closing her eyes in concentration. To Albert's astonishment, the artifact detached itself from her neck, transforming into a sphere of flowing liquid metal that hovered between her palms. Last resort, she explained, her voice strained with effort. Pendant's final purpose. Before Albert could ask for clarification, the sanctuary shuddered as explosives detonated against the main entrance. The ancient seals held, but damage reports flashed across the monitoring displays. The scavengers were breaking through. How long until the Sentinel arrives? Lyrae asked, maintaining her concentration on the floating metal sphere. Albert checked the tracking display. 3 minutes at their current descent speed. Too long. Lyrae nodded grimly. Then we fight. She gestured to the sphere. Soul metal will defend. But requires sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Albert asked, alarmed by her tone. Connection to bearer. Deeper than before. She met his gaze steadily. May change me, but will protect us. Before Albert could protest, Lyrae pressed the sphere against her chest. The liquid metal spread across her body like a second skin, enveloping her completely before hardening into a gleaming armor. Her eyes glowed with the same inner light as the pendant had, and her voice, when she spoke, carried an ethereal quality. Ancient Arvani defense protocol, she explained, examining her transformed limbs with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Merges bearer with soul metal. Temporary but powerful. As if to demonstrate, she gestured toward a section of wall, which rippled and became transparent, allowing them to see the scavengers now breaking through the final barrier to the sanctuary. Stay behind me, Lyrae instructed, moving toward the central chamber's entrance with fluid, predatory grace. The first scavengers breached the sanctuary moments later, a mix of humans and aliens, heavily armed and armored. They advanced cautiously through the outer chambers, clearly awed by the alien architecture, but focused on their prize. When they reached the central chamber and found Lyrae waiting, resplendent in her soul metal armor, they hesitated. One pointed a weapon at her, shouting demands in trade speak. Lyrae raised her hand, and the metal of her armor flowed, extending into a gleaming blade. This place is protected, she announced, her voice resonating with unnatural power. Leave now. The scavengers responded with weapons fire, energy beams and projectiles converging on Lyrae's position. To Albert's amazement, the soul metal adapted instantly, thickening and shifting to absorb each impact. Not a single shot penetrated. What followed was unlike any combat Albert had witnessed. Lyrae moved with impossible speed and grace, the soul metal enhancing her natural abilities and responding instantly to threats. Weapons were deflected, attackers thrown back by tendrils of living metal, barriers formed and reformed as needed. Yet Albert could see the toll it was taking. Each major exertion caused Lyrae's armor to dim slightly, the connection between her life force and the ancient technology depleting her energy. She was winning the battle, but at great personal cost. Just as it seemed she might falter, the sanctuary shuddered from a new impact, this one from above. Through the monitoring system, Albert saw the Sentinel had arrived, deploying armed personnel who were now engaging the remaining scavenger forces outside. Lyrae, he called out. Reinforcements are here. Fall back, she acknowledged with a nod, allowing the soul metal to create a barricade between them and the few remaining scavengers in the sanctuary. As she retreated to Albert's side, the armor began to recede, flowing back into the pendant form at her throat. The moment the transformation completed, she collapsed into his arms, exhausted beyond measure. Hold on, Albert urged, supporting her weight. Help is here. We're going to be okay. Colonial Protection Forces breached the sanctuary minutes later, securing the facility and apprehending the surviving scavengers. Medical personnel rushed to attend to Lyrae while Albert briefed the mission commander on their situation. Remarkable, Captain Rhodes commented after hearing their story. You survived in extremely hostile conditions and managed to preserve this facility, which, I might add, contains cultural and technological artifacts that xenoarchaeologists would consider priceless. What happens now? Albert asked, glancing toward the medical team, tending to Lyrae. We evacuate you both to the Sentinel, Rhodes explained. Your Arvani friend will receive the best medical care we can provide. As for this sanctuary, he gazed around at the ancient architecture. Our standing orders regarding indigenous cultural sites are clear. We'll secure it, document it, but ultimately preserve it intact. Albert felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The sanctuary would be protected, and both he and Lyrae would be safe. Yet one question remained. Captain, he said hesitantly, what about Lyrae? Earth has no formal diplomatic relations with the Arvani. What's her status if she comes with us? Rhodes considered this carefully. Officially, she would be classified as a refugee from a disaster zone. Humanitarian protocols would apply. He studied Albert's expression and added perceptively, "She's important to you, isn't she?" "She saved my life," Albert said simply. "Multiple times. And I saved hers. We've been through everything together." The captain nodded understandingly. "Then I'll make sure the paperwork reflects that bond. Refugee status with your sponsorship should allow her to remain with you while her permanent situation is determined." Relief flooded through Albert as he joined Leray, who was now conscious and watching the activity around her with wary fascination. The medical team had stabilized her condition, though they warned the soul metal's effect on her physiology would require specialized care. "They're taking us to their ship," Albert explained, taking her hand. "You'll receive proper medical attention, and I'll be with you the whole time." Liray's violet eyes searched his face. "And after? What becomes of us?" Albert squeezed her hand gently. "We stay together. That's non-negotiable. I've lost too much to lose you to." The luminescent patterns on her skin pulsed with emotion, visible even through her exhaustion. "Home," she asked simply. "We'll make one," Albert promised. "Whether that's back on Earth, on a colony world, or somewhere else entirely. Together." As they were evacuated to the Sentinel, Albert took one last look at the Arvani sanctuary, the place that had saved them, healed them, and ultimately brought them their salvation. In this alien graveyard, he had found not just survival, but redemption and connection. The ship's medical bay was a flurry of activity as specialists examined Liray, fascinated by her Arvani physiology and the soul metal pendant that had once again taken its place around her neck. Albert remained by her side throughout, explaining their journey, their bond, and the promise they had made to each other. "It's unprecedented," one of the medical officers remarked. "Human Arvani integration on this level. The diplomatic implications alone are secondary to her well-being," Albert interrupted firmly. "Liray isn't a diplomatic opportunity or a research subject. She's a person who's been through hell and deserves respect." The physician had the grace to look abashed. "Of course. I apologize." Days passed as the Sentinel began its journey back to the nearest Earth outpost. Liray recovered her strength rapidly, the advanced medical care accelerating the healing process that the sanctuary had begun. She approached every new experience with cautious curiosity: human food, entertainment systems, the routines of shipboard life. Most crew members treated her with polite respect, though a few were openly fascinated by the first Arvani most humans had encountered in generations. Stories of her defense of the sanctuary spread throughout the ship, earning her a reputation that mixed awe with healthy caution. Albert used the time to file comprehensive reports on his experiences, carefully documenting the fate of his original crew, the conditions on the planet, and the discovery of the sanctuary. He made special note of the scavenger operation at Deep Market, recommending Colonial Protection Forces investigate further and provide humanitarian aid to any legitimate survivors. One evening, as they stood together in the ship's observation deck watching the stars stream by, Liray asked the question that had been on both their minds. "Will your people accept me?" Albert considered his answer carefully. "Some will, some won't. Humanity has always struggled with difference." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "But you won't be alone, and you have skills, knowledge, and perspectives that could be incredibly valuable. The soul metal alone represents technology beyond our current understanding." Liray touched her pendant thoughtfully. "Not meant for exploitation, meant for protection, preservation. And that's how we'll present it," Albert assured her. "As part of your cultural heritage, not as technology to be dissected. I promise." The pendant pulsed softly, as if acknowledging his words. The bond between Liray and her artifact had deepened since the battle in the sanctuary, becoming more integrated with her consciousness. The ship's medical team had documented physiological changes they couldn't fully explain. It seemed the soul metal had partially merged with her on a cellular level, accelerating her healing and enhancing her natural abilities. 2 weeks after their rescue, the Sentinel docked at Outpost Horizon, a frontier station serving as a gateway between Earth-controlled space and the less explored regions of the galaxy. Here, Albert and Lyrae would undergo debriefing while arrangements were made for their eventual transport to Earth. As they prepared to disembark, Captain Rhodes approached them with unexpected news. "Officer Chun, we've received a communication you should be aware of," he said, his expression professional but with an undercurrent of concern. "Your survival has generated significant interest in scientific circles. Several research institutions have already filed requests to interview both of you, with particular focus on Miss Lyrae and her technological artifact." Albert felt Lyrae tense beside him. "Those requests have no standing," he responded firmly. "Lyrae has refugee status under my sponsorship. Any interaction with research institutions would be entirely voluntary." Rhodes nodded agreement. "That's correct, and I made that clear in my responses. However, I thought you should be prepared. Your story, finding each other in that alien graveyard, surviving together against all odds, it's captured imaginations." "We're not a story," Albert said quietly. "We're just two people who refused to let each other die." The captain studied them thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but sometimes the most powerful stories are the true ones." He extended his hand. "Whatever comes next, you have my support. Both of you." As they stepped onto the outpost's main concourse, Lyrae gripped Albert's hand tightly, momentarily overwhelmed by the crowds and the cacophony of different species interacting in the busy transit hub. Her pendant pulsed rapidly, matching her elevated heart rate. "Too much?" Albert asked gently. She took a deep breath, then slowly shook her head. "New, different." But her violet eyes met his, determination replacing apprehension. "But not afraid. Not with you." In that moment, Albert realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, bureaucratic hurdles, scientific curiosity, social adjustment, they would face them as they had faced everything since that fateful day in the ruins, together. 6 months later, they stood on the balcony of a modest apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean on Earth's west coast. Lyrae had adapted to Earth's gravity and atmosphere with surprising ease, though she still preferred cooler temperatures and lower light levels than most humans. Their journey from refugees to residents had not been without complications. As Rhodes had warned, scientific and governmental interest in Lyrae and the soul metal had been intense. But with the support of key allies, including Captain Rhodes and several influential xenoanthropologists who advocated for cultural respect, they had navigated the bureaucracy successfully. Lyrae now held special resident status, with Albert's continuing sponsorship. She had begun working as a consultant for a cultural preservation initiative focused on non-human civilizations, her unique perspective and knowledge proving invaluable. The soul metal remained with her, recognized legally as an inseparable cultural artifact rather than technology subject to research. Albert had accepted a position with the same initiative, his experiences on the Arvani world qualifying him uniquely for cross-cultural work. Together, they were helping document and preserve the knowledge contained in the sanctuary, working remotely with the protection team now stationed there. "Ocean reminds me of sky," Lyrae observed, watching the waves crash against the shore below. Her trade speak had evolved into fluent English, though her accent still carried the musical qualities of her native language. "Always moving, never same twice." Albert put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Do you ever regret coming here?" She considered the question seriously, as she did all questions. "Miss some things. Colors of my world before disaster. Sound of Arvani music. But," she placed her hand over his where it rested on her shoulder. "Found more than lost. Found purpose. Found home." She turned to face him, the luminescent patterns on her skin pulsing with what he now recognized as deep affection. "Found you." They had discussed many times whether other Arvani might have survived elsewhere, on colony ships or distant outposts. One day they might search, might try to reconnect Lyrae with her species. But for now, this was enough. This hard-won peace, this connection that had begun in an alien graveyard and flourished against all odds. "I love you," Albert said simply, the words still new between them, but growing more natural with each utterance. Lirei smiled, a gesture she had learned from humans but made entirely her own. Love you, she echoed, her violet eyes reflecting the sunset. Always will. As darkness fell, the luminescent patterns on her skin glowed more brightly, matched by the gentle pulse of the soul metal pendant at her throat. Two survivors from different worlds, united by compassion and courage, now building something new from the ashes of the past. In an alien graveyard, they had found each other. In saving each other, they had saved themselves. And in the end, they had discovered that home wasn't a place at all. It was the space between two hearts, beating in sync across the stars.